150 feet. That's the distance between a nuclear-armed Soviet jet and the most powerful warship ever built by human hands. This was Tuesday during the Cold War. The American sailors on deck could see the red stars painted on the bomber's wings. Soviet Tu-16 Badger was flying directly over a U.S. carrier, daring America to blink first. And one time that a Soviet bomber flew just a little too low. And what happened next was witnessed by hundreds of American sailors who were told for years to never speak about it. Today, we're talking about it. It's 1968. The world is sitting on a knife edge. The United States and the Soviet Union aren't just competing for territory, but for fear. Whoever can project the most power, the most reach, the most threat, wins the psychological war. And the ocean was their chessboard. The U.S. Navy's Sixth Fleet ruled the Mediterranean like a floating superpower. Aircraft carriers, destroyers, nuclear submarines lurking beneath the surface. It was the most powerful naval force the world had ever seen. The Soviets knew they couldn't match it ship for ship, so instead they sent bombers. The Tupolev Tu-16, NATO codename Badger. This machine was originally built to carry nuclear weapons deep into Western Europe. Wingspan of 108 feet, top speed of 587 miles per hour, a combat range stretching nearly 4,000 miles, meaning it could take off from Soviet soil and reach almost any NATO fleet in the Atlantic or Mediterranean without refueling. By the mid-1960s, the Soviets had deployed over 500 Tu-16s across their military branches. Their mission wasn't to shoot, it was to intimidate, photograph and humiliate, to show NATO that nowhere on Earth was safe from Soviet eyes. And between 1967 and 1970 alone, US forces documented over 100 dangerous close encounters with Soviet aircraft at sea. But knowing the weapon is one thing, watching it in action is something else entirely. Flight operations are running like clockwork. Fuel trucks, ordnance crews, pilots strapping in. Business as usual for the most powerful warship on Earth. Then, a blip. Small, fast, skimming so low on the radar return it nearly disappears into sea clutter. The Combat Air Patrol picks it up first. A Soviet Tu-16 Badger, alone, unescorted, flying at dangerously low altitude with no flight plan, no communication, and absolutely no intention of turning around. Standard Soviet protocol dictated a single pass, photograph the carrier's electronic signature, measure radar response times, then vanish back into the horizon. Cold, clinical, professional, this crew throws the protocol overboard. First pass, the Tu-16 screams across the carrier's bow, low enough that sailors on the flight deck instinctively duck. The roar of its two Mikulin AM-3 turbojet engines, each producing 19,290 pounds of thrust, physically shakes the deck plating beneath their boots. Flight operations are suspended immediately. Second pass, lower, slower, more deliberate. Officers on the bridge press binoculars so hard against their eyes they'll leave marks. F-4 Phantoms sitting on the catapults go to Alert 5, engines ready to light in under 5 minutes. Cameras appear across the deck. Sailors, airmen, everyone watching, everyone recording. Scrambling would have escalated things, so they waited, and what happened on that third pass, nobody on that carrier would ever forget. The Tu-16 came back a third time. This pass was different, the angle was different, the altitude was different. Instead of flying parallel to the carrier, the bomber approached nearly perpendicular, crossing the ship's path, no more than 100 to 150 feet above the water's surface. At nearly 500 miles per hour. At that speed, at that altitude, there is almost zero margin for error. A single miscalculation, a gust of wind, a control input that's 1 degree off, and it's over. Aviation experts who later analyzed similar incidents pointed to 3 likely causes of what happened next. Wake turbulence from the carrier's superstructure could have swatted the bomber sideways. The pilot may have yanked the controls too hard, trying to pull away. Or the engines, screaming beyond their low-altitude limits for too long, simply gave out. We'll never know which one killed them, because within seconds, the Tu-16 banked violently. One wingtip kissed the water. and 75,000 pounds of Soviet aluminum, jet fuel, and Cold War arrogance cartwheeled across the surface of the sea. Gone in under 3 seconds. No survivors, no distress call. The 2 Soviet crew members were gone before anyone could react. Within hours, the phones were ringing in Moscow, and nobody wanted to answer them. Because then the Kremlin had to admit that a Soviet Tu-16 was conducting illegal, dangerously close intimidation, runs over an American carrier, or say absolutely nothing, and let Washington control every word of the story. They chose silence. Official Soviet channels called it a navigational error. 2 elite military pilots, a multi-million ruble strategic bomber, a navigational error. Nobody believed it, not even the Soviets themselves. Behind closed doors, however, something extraordinary was happening. Because this incident didn't exist in isolation. Between 1967 and 1970 alone, the U.S. Naval Institute documented over 100 dangerous interactions between American and Soviet naval forces. 100 in 3 years. That's nearly 3 near catastrophes every single month. The pressure was becoming impossible to ignore, and so, quietly, carefully, away from the headlines, diplomats began drafting what would become one of the Cold War's most critically underrated documents. The Incidents at Sea Agreement was signed on May 25, 1972 in Moscow. It established binding rules of engagement between US and Soviet naval forces, minimum safe distances, communication protocols, a direct acknowledgement that this game of aerial chicken had gone too far. 2 pilots' deaths, unacknowledged, unnamed, officially erased, became the silent foundation of an agreement that may have saved millions of lives. But here's what nobody told you about why the Soviets kept doing this in the first place. The Soviet military had a name for it: the bear hug. Get close, stay close, make the enemy flinch first. And they practiced it with terrifying consistency. Tu-95 Bear bombers probed Alaskan airspace over 50 times in the 1960s alone. Soviet aircraft buzzed NATO carrier groups across the North Atlantic so routinely that American sailors began treating it like weather: unpleasant, inevitable, and dangerous. During the 1973 Yom Kippur War, Soviet reconnaissance flights over the U.S. 6th Fleet in the Mediterranean intensified so aggressively that Washington placed its nuclear forces on DEFCON 3, the highest alert level since the Cuban Missile Crisis. So why? Why keep pushing? 3 reasons. First, ELINT, electronic intelligence. Every time a Soviet bomber flew close, it was harvesting radar frequencies, response times, and electronic signatures. Invisible theft. Second, psychological warfare. Rattle the crew, disrupt operations, make them feel vulnerable on their own floating fortress. Third, and most chilling, it was a global signal to every ally and adversary watching. American carriers are not untouchable. The United States answered with the F-14 Tomcat, which was specifically engineered to kill Tu-16S and Tu-95S before they ever got close. A weapon born entirely from this cat-and-mouse game of death. And yet, decades later, the game never stopped. It just changed its uniform. Now that's not what should terrify you, but what should terrify you is everything you just watched: the dangerous low passes, the reckless proximity, the thin line between intimidation and catastrophe, is still happening. Right now, March 14, 2023, a US MQ-9 Reaper drone is conducting a routine surveillance mission over the Black Sea. 2 Russian Su-27 flankers intercept it. One dumps fuel directly onto the drone, then collides with its propeller. The $32 million aircraft plunges into international waters. No pilots die this time, but the message is identical to 1968. We will get dangerously close, and we will not blink. China absorbed that same playbook and upgraded it. April 2001. A Chinese J-8 fighter collides with a US EP-3 Ares reconnaissance aircraft over the South China Sea. 1 Chinese pilot was killed. The American crew, 24 personnel, forced to land on Hainan Island, detained for 11 days. The diplomatic fallout took months to unravel. And the question that haunted those sailors staring at that smoke on the horizon in 1968 is the same question military commanders whisper in situation rooms today. How close is too close? Before the next mistake isn't a mistake at all. Drop a comment below. Were the Soviet pilots brave, or were they just reckless?